The latest batch of the college football playoff rankings are out. Did they get it right? Also, big one between Tennessee and Georgia. We'll preview the Vols with our buddy Eric Cain. Locked On SEC starts right now.
You are Locked On SEC, your daily podcast on the Southeastern Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And what is happening, everybody? Welcome into Locked On SEC. It's great to have you guys along. I'm Chris Gordy. Thanks for making Locked On SEC your first listen every day. Shout out to everydayers. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, covering your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app today, create an account, and use our code LOCKEDONCollege to get $20 off your first purchase. All right, we got to dive into it as the latest college football playoff rankings are out, dropping last night, and goodness gracious, to look at what the SEC is doing in the latest batch of the college football playoff rankings. We take a look in reverse order. And Tulane 24, Army 20, or Tulane 25, Army 24, Mizzou at 23, LSU at 22, South Carolina at 21. So three SEC teams right there. As Greg McElroy pointed out, he thought a little weird to put South Carolina ahead of LSU. Yes, LSU just lost to Alabama. Embarrassing fashion, but they both have identical records now. I believe they're both 6-3, and LSU beat South Carolina head-to-head. Now, we can get into should they have beaten them and all that, but Greg McElroy did bring up he had a little bit of a problem with that. Clemson 20, Louisville 19, Washington State 18, Colorado 17. Watch what Dion and the boys are doing there in the Big 12. Kansas State 16. Then we get another SEC team, A&M at 15. So A&M still kind of hanging around that territory. They did not play last week. SMU 14, Boise State 13. And then we get into the top 12 rankings. Now, again, this is not how the bracket will set up. We'll get to that in a second. But Georgia 12, Ole Miss at 11. Ole Miss just beat Georgia. Disrespectful for Georgia to drop them down to 12 after they've kind of been a top 5 team for much of the year. Alabama comes in at number 10. Then it was Miami 9, Notre Dame 8, Tennessee 7, BYU 6, Indiana 5, Penn State 4. I think Penn State's getting way too much credit being here in the top 4. Texas number 3, Ohio State 2, and Oregon 1. I think that's a little funky. I know Oregon and Ohio State just played each other a couple weeks ago. There was a winner and there was a loser. Yet they didn't ding Ohio State very much for the loss at Oregon. They did beat Penn State head-to-head, but, man, I feel like it's one of those things where, like, we're giving Penn State a lot of credit for losing to Ohio State. We're giving Ohio State a lot of credit for losing to Oregon. Big Ten, maybe getting a little bit too much love here, but as far as the SEC teams, Texas 3, Tennessee 7, Alabama 10, Ole Miss 11. And like I said, Georgia, who might be playing a playoff elimination game against Tennessee at Sanford Stadium on Saturday, they're 14-3 after a loss under Kirby Smart, bouncing back after each of those previous 8 defeats. Georgia has not lost back-to-back games in the regular season since 2016. That was Kirby's first season coaching at Georgia. And Georgia has defeated Tennessee in 7 of the last 8 seasons, including a 38-10 win on the road last year. So what does the bracket look like? Well, the first round matchups would look like this. You would have Boise State at Ohio State, so that's the 12 seed versus the 5 seed. Number 11, Ole Miss at number 6, Penn State. So Ole Miss, you were hoping maybe they could get a home game at the Grove, but this would have them going on the road up to Penn State. And by the way, it's going to be very cold up there in Happy Valley by the time the playoff rolls around. Number 10, Alabama at number 7, Indiana. I know a lot of people thought that one was funny because can you imagine the Tide faithful going to follow their team up there to Indiana? I mean, can Indiana Stadium even hold all the fans, the Alabama fans that want to go see that one? Then it would be number 9, Notre Dame at number 8, Tennessee. That would be a heck of a matchup with the Irish going into a sold-out Neyland Stadium. That would be a lot of fun. And then, of course, the rest of the brackets, Oregon 1, Texas 2, BYU 3, Miami 4. Again, all that is hypothetical that those are all the conference champions. They're projecting Oregon would win the Big Ten, Texas would win the SEC, BYU would win the Big 12, and Miami would win the ACC. And by the way, that would all be the highest ranked conference champions in there. Ohio State would be in at large, so on and so forth. Now, David Hale over at ESPN, he wrote a piece last night. He said 11 weeks into the season, and one thing seems abundantly clear. The SEC, as good as they've been, their dominance kind of taking a hit. He said the Big Ten is in there with teams ranked number 1, 2, 4, and 5. He said, look, the SEC gets flack for boasting of its greatness routinely. To be sure, that narrative has often bolstered less than elite teams. But this year, every reasonable metric suggests the SEC's production actually matches its ego. And when Ole Miss, Georgia, and Alabama and A&M, number 11, 12, 10, and 15, all with 2 losses, are dogged as a result of playing in a league where every other team warrants a spot in the top 25, it undermines the entire point of having a playoff selection committee that can use judgment rather than simply looking at the standings. And this is what kind of bugs me. And look, I think Pete Thamel had a great piece up yesterday over, not Pete Thamel, Stuart Mandel over at The Athletic, where he basically said, here it is. He said in the AP poll, Texas with 0 top 25 wins is 8 spots above a Georgia team that has 2 top 25 wins and lost to 2 others, of course. But he said Georgia beat them by 2 touchdowns at home in those quality wins. Mandel goes on to say it's up to the committee to break our 80-year-old tradition of 1 loss is better than 2. And here's where I really get into it. I mean, I argued this about Michigan last year. Michigan moved up to number 1 when Georgia lost to Bama in the SEC championship game. And the whole reasoning was, well, I know Michigan hadn't played a ton of great games, but they did beat Ohio State, so they got a huge boost for that. But Michigan's non-conference last year was against Bowling Green and East Carolina and a bunch of nobodies. But the committee at the end of the day just went, well, if you're undefeated or you got 1 loss, we're going to boost you up. And Stuart Mandel makes a hell of a point here. Sometimes a team that has 2 losses should get more credit, because let's think of this realistically. What if you played 5 top 25 teams and you beat 3 of them and you lost 2? That's pretty strong. But then you have a team like Indiana, who's been cruising through this Big Ten schedule, playing nobody. Now, they did beat Michigan this past week. Give them credit, although Michigan stinks this year. And then this week they'll get Ohio State, and Ohio State is very good. But that's going to be the first ranked team that Indiana's going to play. We're rewarding mediocrity because you have 0 in the loss column. And again, it's all about wins and losses. But in other words, we're knocking down the SEC a peg, saying, well, you're all really good and you're beating up on one another, so we're going to knock you down. I just think quality wins, resume wins need to matter. When I can look at a team like Indiana and go, what's your best win? You have to come with an argument. Same goes for teams like SMU and some of these, Boise State and some of these teams up there. You don't get to just rest on the laurels of we've won all our games, because not all schedules are created equal. And this is where I go to Heather Dinich. She was on with Pat McAfee yesterday. And when you have Georgia, Alabama, and Ole Miss already having 2 losses, Heather Dinich went on to explain it may be possible for a 3-loss SEC team to make the playoff. And here's what she said. As much as people keep throwing out the word elimination games every week, I would really hesitate to eliminate a 3-loss SEC team. And that includes if Georgia loses to Tennessee. And here's why. Because in the first 10 years of college football playoff, there have been 13 3-loss teams ranked in the selection committee's top 10 on selection day. So this has happened before. And if history repeats itself, then you could possibly see a 3-loss SEC team in. And they're not all created equal. Let's be clear. All 3-loss SEC teams are not created equal. But if Ole Miss loses a 3rd game, they're done. LSU, they're going to be way at the bottom of the barrel right now. Georgia, though, has one of the toughest schedules in the country. That's why we treat them a little bit differently. And she mentioned, Ole Miss is under more pressure to win than a team like Georgia due to its weaker schedule. The Rebels' 2 losses this year came to LSU and an unranked Kentucky team. But she seems to believe that if any 3-loss SEC team deserves it, it would be Georgia. And again, it just goes to the point of, what we're saying, the resume matters. The win, beating Texas in Austin by 15 matters. You gotta give credit for quality wins as much as you want to ding a team for their losses. And yes, Georgia lost on that last drive of the game against Alabama, where they were going down, possibly to tie it, send it overtime. And then the Ole Miss game this past week was ugly, but again, you beat Clemson, demolished them 34-3 in week 1. You beat Texas in their house by double digits. If they beat top, 7th ranked Tennessee this week in Athens, that's another huge quality win on Georgia's resume. And, I think there's a scenario here where, let's say Georgia wins this one, gets to the SEC championship and loses. There's a lot of debate up on if the loser of the SEC championship should get in. A lot of people are making the argument saying, even if that team has 3 losses, they should be in the playoff because you are clearly the number 2 SEC team. There's no East or West anymore. The team that gets to the SEC championship game and loses is the second best SEC team by default. Even if there's 10-2 teams behind them in the conference, they played an extra game. They got to Atlanta because it was decided they were the second best team. These were the 2 best teams to represent the SEC in Atlanta. So again, sparks a great debate. I think this thing will all figure itself out as it always does. But I do think for the first time in a long time, the SEC is not getting the benefit of the doubt this year because they're beating up on each other. But still, I would, go look at the standings right now. Look at some of those Big Ten teams and who they've played. I still would put tons of SEC teams ahead of some of those, Big Ten teams that I feel like have not really proven themselves. Oregon, Ohio State, sure. Penn State, look, every year James Franklin has made a habit out of they beat everybody not named, Ohio State and Michigan. And, oh, by the way, they played Ohio State 2 weeks ago and lost. They don't get Michigan this year, even while Michigan's down. But, the only other ranked team Penn State's beaten this year is Illinois, and they did it at home. They don't play another ranked team on their schedule. I just feel like with all these SEC teams ranked, clearly if the committee thinks they're good enough to be ranked, those are good wins. We need to reward good wins and not just reward, Penn State ran through their suck-ass conference schedule and beat the Maryland Terrapins and Purdue and Northwestern and Rutgers, and let's just reward them for that. No, ding them. All right, more to come here on Locked On SEC. The big game happening this weekend, Tennessee versus Georgia in Athens. We're going to be joined by Eric Cain, host of Locked On Vols. We'll preview that one. What's the latest on Nico Iamaleava? Will he go? We'll talk about that next with Eric Cain right here on Locked On SEC. Well, first, I want to remind you guys today's episode presented to you by our friends over at Game Time, the Game Time app. They have a new feature on the app. It's called Game Time Picks, and it's going to make getting tickets to see your favorite teams play live even easier. The Game Time Picks filter will push out the fluff and show you only the incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. They use a curation process that'll make it easier for you to save on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, whatever it is. The all-in pricing feature, you can toggle that on. That's going to show you your total upfront with no surprise fees. At checkout, of course, the seat views. You get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. And your Game Time ticket coverage, your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time Picks. Download the Game Time app today, create an account, and use our code LOCKEDONCollege to get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Create an account. Use our code LOCKEDONCollege. Get $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It is game time. We're along here, Locked On SEC, and been a while since we talked to our buddy Eric Cain from Locked On Vols, and man, do they have a big one going this weekend. It is a massive game in Athens. 8-1 Tennessee traveling to 7-2 Georgia. That feels weird to say. The Bulldogs sitting at about a double-digit home favorite over at FanDuel. And Eric, let's just start here. That was my first time kind of looking at the point spread. How healthy is your quarterback, Nico Iamaleava?
Yeah, I don't know. At the time of this recording, it's kind of a day-by-day thing. On Tuesday night, you had one national media member say that he's out. You had another national media member say that nothing's been determined yet. Yet another national media member say that he's playing. So, national media members, you're not on the beat every day. You can be wrong, right? I mean, our stance over at VolQuest.com has been for the last couple of days. It's a day-by-day thing. We're going to wait and see. He was on the practice field doing some things on Tuesday. So, I think the next 24 hours or so, determining how much he continues to progress is going to say an awful lot. So, I don't know, man. We'll have to see. I truly think with this type of deal, it's not like you're going to tough it out and play through it. No, it's a day-by-day situation. So, kind of where's Nico later in the week, that'll kind of determine things. But, Nico got banged up, obviously. Dylan Sampson got banged up, but he came back in and finished the game, thankfully. Wide receiver Dante Thornton got banged up and had to leave. Your left guard and your right guard missed some time in that football game. Tennessee has been a healthy football team for the most part. Lost a couple of guys, Cain and Peely most notably. Been a healthy football team, but kind of took one on the chin there last week with some key guys going out in that football game against Mississippi State.
Yeah, that's so weird because Mississippi State, my big gripe on them is their defense has been awful. They haven't been able to stop anybody, and yet their defense was the one knocking out all the Tennessee offensive guys. And it's just kind of weird how that happened. It is kind of weird, though, right? Like Josh Heupel, who hates talking about injuries, when we hear him come out so definitively say he's in great shape and, it's just a precautionary measure, I almost wonder if that's gamesmanship, because this is the same guy who's like, won't give you an update on anybody typically, and yet he was so definitive. Oh, yeah, he's fine. It was precautionary.
Yeah, I've sat through every single Josh Heupel press conference since he's been head coach here at Tennessee, and I like Josh. I think he's a good dude. I think he's a great coach. He's good with us. He's just not a guy that you can really take seriously when talking about those things, because most of the time, his phrase last year, and of course before injury reports, is, yeah, I got out on the grass a little bit. We'll see where he is at the end of the week. That was literally, carbon copy, copy paste. He would say it about everything, and it's like, oh well, was he on the grass today, coach? So. We'll see. Again, we've maintained to say it's a day-by-day situation with this type of injury. See where he is later in the week. I think the next 24 hours is going to be big for him. So you're right, though. Very, very confident. Saturday he was confident. Monday morning he was very confident. So we'll see what happens. Obviously, it's going to be a big game either way. Even if Nico plays, it's going to be a tough game for sure.
Let's talk about the counter. Gaston Moore did okay when he came in against Mississippi State, but let's talk realistic. I mean, realistically, what are their chances? I mean, what's the game plan if he has to go? Is this tailor-made around we got to run the ball, maybe some short, quick passes? How much does everything change if Moore is the starter?
Well, I mean, realistically, you need your starting quarterback to feel good about this game, right? And like I just said, even if Nico plays, I mean, it's still going to be a tough challenge, a road game down in Athens between the hedges. The moment, I think, was too big for Tennessee in 2022. I think this is a different team. It's a more complete team. It's got a really good defense. But it's still going to be a tough ask. Procedural stuff, pre-snaps, going to be loud in there. How do you deal with all that? Now you throw in a backup quarterback potentially. With Gaston, he knows his offense better than anybody, not named Josh Heupel, not named Joey Halsley. He came with Josh Heupel from UCF, okay, and he's been the third-string quarterback the last couple of years, backup quarterback in those bowl games, and now he's the backup quarterback. He's a walk-on, but again, it's kind of a unique story, though, because, again, he knows the offense so well. He's got a really, really good arm. He came in with a 13-point lead against Mississippi State and grew that lead in the second half. So that was good to see. And they let him throw it a little bit. I mean, they let him throw it down the field. They've got confidence in his arm. Where he is obviously not as good as Nico. Ball's not as sharp. Arm's not as strong. Off platform, not as great. Nico can make so many plays on the run. Not just running the football, but obviously throwing on the run. That's not necessarily Gaston. But if it is Gaston Moore, you go in there and you run your offense. You rely on Dylan Sampson, which is what Tennessee's done all season long, and you rely on that defense. So, sure, it can look a little bit different. I think the tight ends will need to be more involved. I think instead of 20-yard digs, it should be, 10-yard outs and more of those instead of taking as many shots down the field. But I think for the most part, you run your offense and you rely on that offensive line and Dylan Sampson, who won you a lot of games on the offensive end.
Yeah, it's interesting. Kind of, the last couple of weeks watching Caden Salter at Liberty, watching Taven Jackson at Indiana. It's like these are all former Tennessee quarterbacks elsewhere doing their thing. But yeah, look, if it's got to be more, we'll see what happens. But I tend to agree with you. It's almost like, look, Nico, if you're 60%. We need, 50%. We need you. We'll figure it out when we get out there. You mentioned Dylan Sampson. I've been so impressed with him. It feels like every week he's better and better than I thought he would be before the season. But what has made him so good? I mean, he's the outright leading rusher in the SEC, and it's not even close, to be honest.
Well, he's running behind a veteran offensive line for the most part. I know Lance Hurd's new to the system, and Lance Hurd's gotten better every single week, and I think that's been big. But, veteran offensive line that's played a lot of games here at Tennessee. Dylan Sampson is tough. The last 4 games, Gordy, 30 carries, 28 carries, 26 carries, 27 carries. I think that's more than what they want, but they've kind of had to ride him in the second halves to win and put away these football games. And he's been, up for that challenge. He just gets stronger and stronger as the game goes on. He went down in the second quarter, went to the locker room early for halftime, and everybody in that stadium's holding their breath like, oh no. And he's not out there the first series. Tennessee's offense goes out there to start the second half. You have, kid you not, backup quarterback, 4th string running back because the backup running back is out for this game. You back up right tackle and back up left guard. And you're sitting there like, oh my goodness. But of course he comes back in and finishes the game strong. He's got good feet. He's tough, runs through first contact, good vision. Dylan Sampson's having a phenomenal year. And I know a lot of Tennessee fans were hoping he'd come back for another year. I don't know if that's a realistic dream anymore for Tennessee fans. I think he's going to the NFL.
Yeah, number 1 in the SEC in rushing, almost over 200 yards more than the second guy, which is Jarquez Hunter. I mean, barring an injury, he's going to finish as the SEC's leading rusher this year, 7th in the country. And it's just crazy to think because this is an offensive, Jalen Wright was so awesome last year. I didn't think Dylan Sampson was going to be better than Jalen Wright a year later, but
it's the volume, Gordy. The last couple of years, last year was a 3-headed monster: Jabari Small, Jalen Wright, Dylan Sampson. Year before that, it was Jalen Wright, Jabari Small. This year, it's truly just Dylan Sampson. I mean, he's a true RB1, and again, I think they want to play more, but he's risen to the challenge, and he's not gotten weaker as the game gone on. He's gotten stronger, so it's been fun to watch.
More with Eric Cain in just a second, but I want to remind you guys, today's episode presented to my friends over at FanDuel, and you can get ready to tackle the NFL action with America's #1 sports book. Right now, new customers can bet $5 to get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app giving you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL and college all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you want to go check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more. You can do it on the same page where you're placing your bets, and that is at FanDuel.com. Head to FanDuel.com today to join and sign up. If you have never signed up before, you will get started with that $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's at FanDuel.com. Of course, they got all the college games up there for you, including the one we're talking about, Tennessee at Georgia. If you like the Vols, plus the 10.5 on the road, you can get that over at FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Continue our conversation with Eric Cain here, host of Locked On Vols. And Eric, let's talk a little bit about how this game matches up. I mean, the Georgia Bulldogs have not looked great on offense here in recent weeks, and the quarterback woes, Carson Beck, has been a turnover machine. Only the one pick against Ole Miss, but man, the offense was just it feels like they can't do anything well. And they've had some injuries to running backs and all this, but what's the game plan here if you're Tennessee? As good as the defense has been going up against this Georgia offense that has really been struggling.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why, regardless of who's playing quarterback for Tennessee, again, I will reiterate, Nico, to have confidence in Tennessee, Nico needs to play. But regardless of who's playing quarterback, this defense is going to give you a chance, right? Offensive line injuries have been present for Georgia this year. I think in turn that's played a role in the inconsistent play for Carson Beck. And Carson Beck's just been a turnover machine here lately. I think 14 turnovers in the last 6 games for him, which is just incredible number. He's had a couple games where he's thrown 3 picks. They've never had those amazing weapons at the perimeter like a wide receiver. They've had some good ones, George Pickens and some really nice players, Ladd McConkey last year and so on and so forth. They've had tight ends. That's not necessarily the case this year. And, of course, the running backs. I mean, they usually have 3 or 4 running backs ready to roll. And, of course, running backs, they're 15th in the league in rushing this year. So they've struggled. And I think Tennessee's defensive line veteran-led, the numbers that are there, James Pierce, Joshua Joseph, Omar Norman Lott, all those guys are going to get after Carson Beck and hopefully speed up that clock and force him into bad decisions. So I think the Tennessee defense, though, hasn't been great against the run the last 2 weeks, is going to have Tennessee in this football game and create some opportunities, which I think it needs to.
If Tennessee wins the game, we look back, we go, Tennessee won the game because why?
Tennessee wins the game because played good defense, and Tennessee just ran the football and built off that. Some explosive plays. Tennessee had 3 touchdowns of 30 or more yards last week against Mississippi State, and as you pointed out, of course, State's defense is not great, but it all built off that run game. So Tennessee cannot be one-dimensional, especially if it's a backup quarterback in Gaston Moore. You can't just be on that run. So allow the run to open up the pass, but any way you want to spin it, defense has got to create opportunities for Tennessee. You got to force some turnovers, short fields, special teams. I think could be a difference maker in this game. Boo Carter back at punt return last week was incredible. Peyton Lewis at kick return had a couple of nice returns. So I think the 2 other phases in the game are going to have to help Tennessee's offense out, because I see this being, in all honesty, I see this being a defensive game. Georgia's defense is really solid. Tennessee's defense is really solid. Who can create those extra opportunities? And I think for Tennessee, those other 2 phases must open some things up.
Are you shocked the spread is so big? I mean, FanDuel's at 10.5. A few other books are at 10, but if you'd have asked me, in all honesty, before this, I would have said Georgia by 6. I would have set the line way lower.
Well, I mean, I got to imagine that they think Nico's not playing, right? I mean, I got to imagine. And so what if later in the week that changes and, we can see it shrink back down to maybe 6, maybe 5. I don't know. I assume that's taken into account that Nico is not playing. That's kind of what my mindset's been thinking about all week. But if everybody's full, healthy, ready to go, I mean, Georgia should be a favorite. Georgia's the home team. Georgia's a good team, but certainly not by 9.5 or 10 or whatever it is.
It is funny, Kirby saying, at least we're finally at home. These tough games have been playing on. They had to go to Texas, to Bama, to Ole Miss. Schedule makers did them no favor. I feel like we didn't talk enough about Georgia's tough schedule. Last thing for you, Eric, we with the tiebreaker for the SEC championship is insane. We got 3 one-loss SEC teams still, and 5 teams at 2 losses right now. This is a big one just because if Tennessee can pull this one out, you feel good about they'll beat UTEP, and then winning at Vandy. It's not a cakewalk, but you feel pretty good about their chances. You punch your ticket, you're going to Atlanta for the first time in a while. If you lose, though, man, the tiebreakers get real hairy here, because that means you lost to Georgia, but you beat Bama, and it's all these weird tiebreakers that could come into play.
And it's kind of weird. I was talking to somebody about this. It was actually on our message board over at VolQuest.com. It's almost like the road to Atlanta, the SEC championship talk is not been a big focal point this week or this season, because it's the first year of the 12-team playoff, and you have all these potential 10-2 teams. So it's how many teams are getting in for the SEC, the Big Ten, the ACC looks like a 1-team bid right now. So is the Big 12. Notre Dame's in there. So I think all that's kind of taken away from, what should be an interesting SEC championship game for whatever 2 teams are in there. If Tennessee wins, you're right. I mean, barring anything unexpected, Tennessee probably going to Atlanta for the first time since 2007, and that's a really, really big deal. That's awesome. And I don't know where you are, Gordy, and we'll kind of see as these different rankings come out week by week what they kind of value. I have a hard time thinking that if you're in the SEC championship game and you lose and that's your 3rd loss, you're kept out of the playoffs. I think that's tough, man. You're gonna punish a team for playing an extra game. So theoretically, you win this game.
They did it to Georgia last year, right? Georgia was undefeated, lost a close, it was a touchdown game or whatever, Bama, and they dinged them. They knocked them out. So
that's true, but now you got a 12 team, right? Now you got a 12 team, so that doesn't have to happen until it does, right? So it's going to be interesting, man. But I mean, Tennessee a chance to do something again it hasn't done since 2007, and that's pretty awesome. You lose this game for Georgia, you're out. You lose this game for Tennessee, boy, it gets really, really hairy if you go the rest of the way and finish 10-2. So control what you can control. That's what you do in between the lines on Saturday, and see if you can win.
Yeah, I do want to plug. Stuart Mandel had a really good piece up, basically saying he said, "Look, it's up to the committee to break our 80-year-old tradition of 1 loss is better than 2." They need to be thinking more like the NCAA tournament selection committee, as opposed to, well, you're undefeated or you got 1 loss, so you're better than a 2-loss team. What are those 2 losses? Or if you played 5 top 25 teams and you took 2 losses, but you got 3 wins. And then you have Indiana, who hadn't played anybody, and their one loss might beat Ohio State. Like, to me, I got to value the team that, you lost 2 tough ones, but you won 3 tough ones, as opposed to the team that didn't play anybody. Like, I think common sense has to kind of come into, the evaluation here.
Yeah, nobody's asking me, but for me, at least when you talk about all these SEC teams, if there's going to be 5 in there, 4 in there, or whatever, head-to-head's got to be a big deal, right? I mean, Tennessee beat Alabama. Tennessee and Georgia square off. I know Alabama beat Georgia. Of all the college football playoff teams from the SEC, Ole Miss has the worst loss. I mean, at home to Kentucky. Like, what's going on there? To me, it should be head-to-head, and then strength of schedule, and then quality wins versus bad losses. That's just kind of how I would do it. But I'm not. I don't have a chair in that committee room there to make these decisions. But I think head-to-head. I mean, at some point, like, I get Alabama's playing really good football, and I get Alabama's kind of the team right now. But like, in regards to Tennessee, like, it's why you play the game. I mean, Tennessee beat Alabama. So, like, if it came down to Alabama, Tennessee for jockeying for position, I get the FBI, I get the strength of schedule and all that, but you own the head-to-head. So, like, I don't know. What is the committee value? We'll find that out over the month of November.
And Vandy, look, they've been an awesome story, but they finish at LSU and home versus Tennessee. If they lose these 2, they're 6-6.
Yeah.
They beat Alabama. So now we're looking at Bama going, yeah, your loss to Vandy's not a great loss. They're 6-6. So, you're right. But you're right. Head-to-head, that absolutely has to matter. But last year they went, well, Bama, I know you lost to Texas, but we're going to excuse that because you just barely beat Georgia. Well, Georgia didn't have a loss. Well, it doesn't matter. Bama just won, So they're going to do whatever the hell they want. But it'll certainly be fun to watch. Eric, always appreciate the time. Let everybody know where they can find you.
Hey, Locked On Vols every morning, 30 minutes or less, free and available on all platforms, and getting you set for Tennessee and Georgia. A big one between the hedges coming up this weekend.
There he is. He is Eric Cain, host of Locked On Vols. That's going to do it for this edition of Locked On SEC. Thank you guys for making us your first listen every day. And hey, now you can make your second listen. Check out Eric with Locked On Vols. That's going to do it for Locked On SEC. I'm Chris Gordy. You guys have a great day. We'll talk more all things SEC tomorrow right here on Locked On SEC.